Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning for the quarterly board meeting for the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. My name is Tony Luisi. I am the board chair, and let's start off with some introductions. So in the room at the board level, in addition to myself, we have Jessica Mahar, Harvey Alexander, Nancy Pearson, John Brust, John Sapas, and on virtual we have Elaine Chinian, Stephen Rice. I don't see Brad Glass. Nope. I don't see Mike McLaughlin. Nope. I don't see Andrew Curry. Andrew Curry just joined us on behalf of Town Colony. Hello. Hello. And we don't have Peter Barber yet.
No, we have Don Sapas if Peter is unable to join.
Are you covering Don for?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, and then I think that covers it from the board level. Chris, want to do intros for senior staff?
Sure. In the room we have joining us. We have Vicki with Visitor Services, Jackie, who is actually our IT in-house person today, and also an environmental educator. Pammy Price. Pammy's a new staff member, environmental educator with us, Preserve Naturalist environmental educator. Erin Keinel is our Director of Education Programs. She'll be presenting today. Lisa Anthony is our Director of Finance and Ops. You'll hear from Lisa for finance as usual. Patty, did you mention Patty?
No.
Hi, Patty. Patty McLaughlin is our office manager. She's taking minutes. Great.
And thank you, Patty, for doing that. And we are also joined by Brad Glass on behalf of the City of Albany. Hi, Brad. And Mike McLaughlin on behalf of the county. Hi, Mike. Great. So I think that covers it for introductions, and we can just move into considering the minutes from the September 15th meeting. I did not attend that meeting, so I have nothing to provide on the minutes. Unless there's any discussion, can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make that.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, then let's move right on to an opportunity for comments from the public. Do we have any members of the public with us this morning who would like to share any comments or questions that they may have?
We have Penny Bavura here. Hi, Penny. Penny's
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Penny.
Hi, thank you for having us. So again, my name is Penny Bavura. I'm the Vice President of the Friends of the Pine Bush community, and just wanted to give you a quick update what we've been doing sort of this last quarter and the year. So we've had some transitions at the board level. We've had two long-term board members who have fulfilled their terms. So we will miss Darwin and Mike. But in the year, we've welcomed three new board members, Jeff Corbin from Union College, Eileen Burns, Allison Baxter, and two new committee members, Sonia Willett and Jodalisa Cheklik. So very exciting for all that has been accomplished in the past year, but we look forward to what's coming in 2023. Again, continuing on that theme, we, the Friends, much to the elation of several staff members in the room, have an operating plan for 2023. We're very excited about this, along with committee goals and all that sort of good energy moving forward. In fact, our social committee actually has programs already set up through first quarter. So if you're a book reader, just so you know, our first read is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And so you'll see that and more on the web pages. So please feel free to join us. And in addition, we have activity on our fundraising committee, which so far for our year-end appeal, we've raised about $3,500, which is great and on par with what we've done in the past couple of years. So very exciting. So that's the update from the Friends. Any questions?
No? Looks like the room is all set. Thank you, Penny.
Thanks.
Thank
Penny.
you.
All right, well, let's move into reports. From my perspective, I'll share just since last board meeting, the Environmental Bond Act passed by the voters of the state in November, which is a big win for all of us. It's $4.2 billion. Currently, just for everyone's awareness, the governor is convening an interagency work group to start ascertaining the processes that will be used for identifying projects, identifying application procedures, and that will be through engagement with a lot of stakeholders to make sure that those dollars flow over the coming years in the best way possible to kind of realize the intent of the Bond Tax program. So there will be a lot more detail to come as time passes, but that's where we are right now. So in terms of my report, I think that covers it, other than I'll just also add that I hope everyone enjoys the holidays and drives safely today within the impending snowstorm. So, do any other members of the board have anything to share?
The photo show is really great. Everybody, I assume, has looked at it. Thank you for all the work that you've done to do that, and the friends.
This is our 9th year, I think. Does that sound right? Pine Bush Perspectives, next year's 10th anniversary. So yeah, these look really good. And there's also, I guess we're moving into my report. I jumped the gun, I'm sorry. Part of my report was to mention the Pine Bush Perspectives. And so it's the last couple of years, because of the pandemic, we didn't have this set up as the exhibit the way we used to. So we just had it as part of a story walk on the blue trail going out from the pavilion. So this year, well, actually it was in the front too, whatever the case. So this year it's both. It's like a hybrid. So it's inside and it's also outside as part of the story walk. There's a banner outside. So we had the most submissions ever this year. So that's pretty exciting. So take a look when we finish up the meeting. Those of you who are remote, when you're here, stop in, take a look. And I guess for those of you that are remote, can you see the screen that I'm sharing, the agenda okay?
If you share the screen, they'll go away. We'll go over to the
I
side.
guess we should have checked. Is our audio okay for those of you who are remote?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. There.
Can see you now.
Okay, so a couple other things. I mentioned Tammy Price, who just joined us several weeks ago. We also have a new staff member, John Lowe's. John was a part-time visitor services specialist with us for almost 2 years, I think. John, forgive me, but John has now been hired as Discovery Center Operations Coordinator. And when we get under presentations, Aaron's going to talk about the restructuring that we did for staff in the Education Discovery Center Department. We'll get to that. Smoky Bear Day, that's highlighted nicely in the update in your board pack. Take a look at all the updates. There's a lot of stuff that went on in the last quarter. Smoky Bear Day is yet one of the events that we host for the public, free public events that continue to grow. This year, it was the weekend after Columbus Day, and we had over 400 participants with Smoky, and we had our local forest ranger, Tyler Mitchell, there with Smoky. So, and much to Tyler's disappointment, he had to do an interview on camera live with Smoky prior to that. And he did a great job. So, speaking of fire, Elaine, I think that we mentioned this at the meeting last time. The fire that was at Minnewaska State Park, we were asked by DEC and Parks to help our fire staff to help with our equipment with that suppression effort. We were down there. That fire burned. There were 2 of them. Napanock was a large one. It burned for 8 days. It's like 270 acres. That's part of the partnership we have with those state agencies to help out when they have wildfires. So we were happy to do that. The update shows that we've burned about 323 acres this year, prescribed burning, which is pretty considerable, and I believe it's actually jumped higher than that, closer to 382. And we're probably, by the looks of what's on the ground now and what's coming, we're probably out for a while.
Is there a historical average, annual average?
Yes, but I couldn't tell you what it is. But the goal is 200 acres a year, and sometimes we don't hit that, but I would say consistently over the last several years we have exceeded that pretty greatly, actually. We prepare 700 acres for burning usually every year. And it all depends on weather and wind conditions, climate conditions, basically, and weather of where we can burn. So I'm going to stop sharing. I want to do a quick report on this. I want to show you some land acquisition that we're continuing to work on. Then I'll stop. So this is a property. It's 15 acres. The board approved our moving forward to get an appraisal and acquire the property. So we appraised it, and we're working now finally towards closing it. A typical project, takes a year. This is in a foreclosure situation. There's a receivership, so it's a little more complicated. We had to have a survey done, not just the property, but access for an easement to get in there. This property appraised at $40,000. We came to an agreement at $30,000. Again, we should close soon. I was hoping by the end of the calendar year, but more likely in early January. You can see where it sits within other protected areas here. And there's another one, which is a really interesting partnership project. And Mike McLaughlin is on here. So I'll thank Mike and the county legislature, and the county exec for helping work on this. So this is kind of far out here. That property I just said we're going to close on soon, that's here. Here's another piece of property we're working on that gives us the first connection into Woodlawn across the county border. This property is a tax foreclosure that we worked with the county. The county has donated and transferred that property. It's in the process of transferring to the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. Mohawk Hudson, through our cooperative agreement, is going to have us manage it. The Friends of the Pine Bush community, who you heard from Penny, is going to pay the legal services and legal fees for Mohawk Hudson, and the city of Schenectady updated our agreement in Woodlawn to give us access. So all that came together for 8 acres. But 8 acres doesn't sound like much, but it's the first parcel that we've acquired or will be acquiring to get us that connection to Woodlawn, and that's outlined in the management plan.
What do you call that property?
Call it Muka, M-U-K-A, because the owner who foreclosed on it, that's their last name.
Okay.
And it's gone through several foreclosures. It has lots of interesting background to it. There's railroad issues. There's National Grid. Before that, it was Niagara Mohawk, and it's foreclosed a number of times beforehand. And the title is over 200 pages. Right.
Chris, does the price that the successful price on the other parcel, does that bode well for some of the other potential acquisitions that are out there? Or is it that parcel is not buildable and that's why?
Why is that? Why would 15 acres appraise at 40,000?
Yeah,
Because it's somewhat landlocked without that easement, and it's because of that. It's an unusual parcel for access. You could put a house on it. You could. It's not completely wet.
Yeah. Okay.
2/3 of it's upland. I mean, it's nice little forest, but it's the access. It's odd. There's not to belabor, but going through the parcel that's adjacent. There's already an easement to get to a cell phone tower. So we have to have access on that easement, on that driveway, with that owner, and then we've surveyed an easement off of that into our property, and it's gated, so it's complicated it would be complicated for a homeowner.
But we are negotiating to memorialize that easement as part of our.
That's all. Yeah,
That's already done.
title company has approved all that. Yeah. The complications right now are with the bank and the owner and the receiver, and the receivership, trying to figure that out because there's back taxes that we are paying. Obviously, that's part of at closing. The buyer's costs will help offset that to the seller. Like I said, it's for 15 acres. It's a complicated thing, but it ties nicely into this whole area to start to put things together.
Chris, why are you having the land conservancy own it?
Because it's landlocked, and our policy doesn't allow us to take landlocked properties.
Okay. And is that why, if you said the title company, are you using the title insurance of the acquisition? So is that why that's allowed? Because it will be held by
It's not our title company, it's Mohawk Hudson's title
right,
company.
okay, that's why it's not.
Yep, and they will sign off on that. Yep, because we
It's
have
not
the,
a state acquisition.
correct, and because I have the access, the written agreement with the city of Schenectady to access it, and it ties in with us.
The title process has been very difficult, state acquisition.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
That's helpful.
If,
Thank you.
yes, if we were to use our title company for that, that would be very challenging. Which is why we have a great partnership with Mohawk Hudson.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks for asking that. That's all I have.
Then let's turn it over to Neil.
Neil, you're muted.
Yeah, I think that's our share.
Thought I hit that button. Sorry, this is my first time using Zoom. Good morning, everyone. Happy holidays. Coming to you from White Creek, New York. Technical committee report for this quarter is pretty brief because the committee has not needed to meet. We haven't had any new projects that required convening the technical committee. I, through email and with the technical committee, have had some communications with a couple of applicants and in particular the town of Colony. You remember there's a small solar project proposed within a full protection area adjacent to preserve out on Curry Road. And the applicant, DEC, the town and commission staff continue to evaluate that project, but the full application has not yet come before the committee to review. The only other thing I wanted to update you on is the management plan review. I mentioned last quarter that we were working on evaluating two documents in particular. One was the education and outreach plan. Forgive me, Erin, if she's in the room and I misstated the name of that document. But the second is the fire management plan. So Tyler and I, working through our partners with the North Atlantic Fire Science Exchange, hosted a couple of workshops. One in-person half-day field trip through the preserve with fire managers and burn bosses from around the region, showing them the preserve, getting their feedback on our prescribed fire parameters. And then we had another half-day online workshop with an even bigger audience discussing the same thing. So Tyler and I are working on reviewing all of that feedback and putting together a white paper effectively for all of you as we continue to evaluate potentially modifying some of the prescribed fire parameters in our fire management plan. And any changes that we want to make to our on-site fire prescriptions require that we update the fire management plan. No matter how good the reason may be for any particular management unit, we have to work within the approved prescriptions. And those approved prescriptions are all mandated by the fire management. So in order to create some updates, we've got to first go back to that master document. Other than that, based on the feedback we've received from staff so far, by and large, it looks like the existing management plan and EIS is still effectively serving its purpose. There doesn't seem to be an overwhelming need to revamp either the overall management plan or the environmental impact statement associated with it. So we're focusing on these couple of what are actually appendices within the management plan. And the staff will bring our recommendations to the technical committee, hopefully in the next quarter, and have a more thorough analysis and report for you all in the spring. And that's all I have, Chris, from the technical committee. Unless folks have questions. Thank you.
Questions for Neil before we move on? All right, thank you, Neil. Next up, Lisa with our financials.
Thanks. Happy holidays, everybody. Oh, yep, I got it.
activity just goes through October 31st, 2022. On the revenue side, dues and contributions are $7,300 higher than budget. This is due to our quarterly trust note donations that came in over budget. Government grants and contracts are 87% of budget. This is directly related to the expenses below, which came in at 83. They're a little bit lower, so our grant revenue was a little bit lower. Mitigation fees are $6,200 over budget. This is due to our national grid mitigation, which is our non-cash mitigation, which is in deferred revenue that we hold, that we've held for years, 2013, I think. So we used a little bit of that on prescribed burn. Lease revenue is on budget. Other revenue is $7,800 higher than budget, and this is due to increased sales and the Discovery Center for merchandise. So revenue came in at 90% of budget for the month of October. On to expenses, personnel and fringe are 85% of budget. 52,000 of this is in salaries. We had 2 months of vacant position into permanent positions, and less seasonal in education and science this year. And benefits came in at $108,000 under budget. We just made a $150,000 payment in November for the retirement system. It will not show on our statement of financial activity. It's actually a balance sheet account. So this personnel and fringe will show under for the year. But when we record this in November, I'll put that $150,000 in cash below the line, which will stay on the bottom of this report. So we'll actually have a credit this year in the pension account of about $40,000 to the expense, which has never happened. This is due to the discount rate slash interest rate rising and the present value being less liability because the interest rate higher over, say, 20 years out. So travel and training, 39% of budget. This will catch up a little bit toward the end of the year. We have conferences, our NAI conferences, science conferences, and our education conferences happen toward the end of the year. Contractual is at 71% under budget. In November, we had $200,000 in contractual and stewardship. Communication is very close to budget for the year. Occupancy, this is where we hold our utilities. It's under budget, but we'll catch up. We assume over the winter months due to the cost of utilities. Supplies and equipment are $17,000 under. This is due to computer equipment that has not been purchased yet. Staff uniforms and supplies across various departments. Other expenses are slightly under budget, and total expenses came in 83% of budget. So overall, on our operating surplus, revenue and expenses came in under budget at 90 and 83% for October, giving us an operating surplus of $193,000. Now, if you look below that, and this ties into our Paris reporting and their budget, the non-cash operating revenues, depreciation, $161,000. It's just our monthly depreciation for capital assets. Our net loss on investments is $994,000. Some good news on that. In November, we gained $316,000 back. Market volatility, as we all see out there. So non-cash total excess revenues, change in this position are $962,000 loss. And this will be tied to our audited financials and our Paris report, which will go over that 5-year budget on that. Any questions on that? Okay, statement of net assets. Cash and cash equivalents. Cash is $223,000 higher due to an advance that we received in the second quarter payment from DEC. Grants receivable is $90,000 more, and this is the DEC expenses that were owed from October that have not been paid. Accounts receivable, we have $23,000 left due to our quarterly mitigation being paid. And inventory increased slightly. We had great sales, merchandise sales that I just went over have increased, so we had to replenish the gift shop inventory. Prepaid expenses decreased, and you'll see this every March to April, every year into the new year. In March, we have to record all of our prepaid expenses that fall into the next fiscal year, and we'll reverse those out in April. We have a little bit left over in there for legal fees, and that should be done very soon. We should be using that investment. Here we decreased $994,000 due to market conditions, negative performance in all four funds, and we did increase $316,000 in November. Capital assets decreased $161,000 due to depreciation. Planned and deferred outflows from retirement remain the same. And in November, I did book a journal entry to this. So we're going to see a big change here. We're going to record a net pension asset instead of one of the liabilities for the retirement system, again, due to the interest rate / discount rate. So total assets decreased $963,000 total. Onto liabilities, not too much here. Accounts payable increased a little bit due to expenses. And deferred revenue, this is the national grid mitigation revenue that I was talking about, statement of revenues. We utilized $5,500 for that. Pension liability and OPEB liability direct will remain the same. Again, these will change in November. Net pension liability will decrease about $168,000 in November. The total net liability is only $2,100, and due really to national grid deferred revenue being utilized. Net assets, capital assets decreased $161,000 due to depreciation. Reserved assets remain the same, and unreserved assets decreased $800,000, giving us a decrease in total net assets of $962,000. This is our operating surplus of $193,000, loss on investments of $994,000, and depreciation expense of $100,000. Any questions on that? On the investment report, all four funds were down through October 31st. $375,000 our reserve fund, Discovery Center $18,000, endowment $510,000, and our OPEB money market $89,000. Total $994,000 loss. As of November 30th, we have a $678,000 loss. Any questions on that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
All right, let's move to Erin.
Morning. I have a quick update on our Discovery Center grounds project. At the last board meeting, I gave a short presentation about the grounds project and the next steps that we're taking in that process, and that's reflected in the minutes in the board packet. So at the last meeting, I mentioned that we were posting an RFP, and we did that, and we received 12 proposals. So we had a really great response rate to our RFP. This again is for landscape design services for the redesign of the Discovery Center grounds. And so our Discovery Center grounds committee, which is made up of staff, got together, we reviewed the proposals, we selected a best value consultant, and we're currently in contract negotiations with that company. That's Bergman. We're working on those contract negotiations right now. And again, the Discovery Center grounds project, we had identified several improvement opportunities years ago. And given all that we've learned in the past couple of years, the pandemic, and also being more aware of accessibility needs in the grounds and different ways that we can meet a diversity of needs, and that includes mobility, aging, the neurodiverse, and how can we better meet those needs and create connections for all people to the Discovery Center. Anybody have any questions about where we are in that process?
What do you see as the most significant outcome? What will we notice?
There's several. There's probably the biggest things that we've identified are aesthetics, safety, and accessibility. So really creating that in terms of aesthetics when people come into the Discovery Center is really recognizing the best of the Pine Barrens. So seeing this landscape and really recognizing that something special here. So definitely with the entryway as it is now, there's room for improvement there in terms of safety. There's issues with the parking, access from the parking. we could probably be doing a better job in getting people safely from the parking lot to the Discovery Center and also out to the trails. And then in terms of accessibility, right now, so we are ADA compliant presently, but there's a lot more that we could do, creating areas of the grounds that are more welcoming and engaging for diversity people. It's pretty big.
And ideally, when do you think the designs will be done, and what type of construction schedule are you looking at?
So our initial goal was by the end of the fiscal year, by March 31st. That's still our goal, but we recognize that we are a little bit behind schedule in our process right now. So we'll see how that goes, but that is still our goal.
Karen, do we ever get any complaints from any user groups about accessibility? And I'm not, we need to make it more accessible, I know that, but has anybody said, were it more accessible, we would, we'd be there more often, or?
Yes, we do receive feedback, and currently our accessible trail, only part of it is currently accessible right now due to some outstanding repair needs that we have on the trail. So absolutely, we get a lot of feedback, asking for that. Yeah.
So Aaron will be on the agenda,
Hear from you again.
whether you like it or not.
That's right. I'll be back.
Aaron's going to join us in reports to continue to update on the grounds project. So we'll hear again from Aaron where we are in the middle of March on this project too. Great.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, we have 4 action items for this meeting, starting with next year's annual plan, and I'll turn it to you, Chris.
Okay. So this is the annual plan starting April of 23, running through March 24. This annual plan is the same format that you see every year. This is the clean version, the red line version, if you will, with the edits follow that, so you can see, do that every year so you can see what's changed. Not a lot changes. The language is very similar. This is something we also provide to DEC as part of our contract, so it kind of outlines what our plans are for the year. Neil talked about the management plan update, or updating the management plan and those recommendations. The only other thing I wanted to point out that you probably will hear from the Friends as we move along is a short film project. So we've been in discussions, we've been working and talking with the Friends and a videographer, a professional videographer who's done film work for PBS, Discovery, looking into possibly creating a short film that the Friends would support that would highlight the best of the pine bush. So we have that in there. And also there's a new trail monitoring system that Neil will talk about in his in the presentation section. There's these trail counters, trailhead counters, which are pretty cool. And everything else is relatively the same, language-wise.
So there was no impact on this from the recent reclassification of the northern long-eared bat, right? Threatened to endangered.
Good question. So those of you who may or may not be familiar, the northeastern long-eared bat has been uplisted from threatened to endangered. We did acoustical surveys here in the pine bush a number of years ago with a bat specialist at the request of Fish and Wildlife when it was a threatened species because of our tree clearing. Their habitat are trees, mature trees. So we've been in contact with both DEC and Fish and Wildlife, and they'll be going through a process to evaluate, what impact there may be on our habitat work, and give us guidance. Our guidance will come out by the end of January, February 1, I think it is. So the word is from Fish and Wildlife staff, continue what you're doing, and then we'll let you know. So it could impact our tree work. It could result in additional surveys. We did not officially find any northern long-eared bats. But it is recognized habitat. And the reason that it was uplisted, for those of you familiar with white nose syndrome, a fungal infection that bats get that's decimating bat populations, that's really taken a toll on the northeastern.
And is that
don't know. I mean, I can't speak definitively about it, but there was some information saying that it was declining and bat populations were increasing, but I don't think that's the case for the species.
I think the species population is down 98%. Yeah, no, it's pretty specific.
Any other questions for the annual plan?
I have a question for this annual plan, but I think for the next one, as I was looking through this, you know, the Climate Action Council is coming out with its scoping plan soon, and I think that the team might want to take a look at that once there's more certainty in that plan is released to understand, you know, as we're doing things like ground facilities updates, what could be done here, and then also that, which Tony mentioned, there is funding available for, you know, energy efficiency, renewable energy at state facilities. So there might be some interesting work to look at in, you know, the coming year leading up to the next annual plan.
Yeah.
To think about how this facility may need or want to change. And then the other thing on just facilities is that I know we get a lot of school programs, and taking a look as we're updating our facilities into what kind of like EV charging infrastructure should be going in outside will be important, because all of the state school bus fleets are mandated to turn over to electric. So again, like as you're planning for facilities going forward, these are some of the new policies that you might want to take a look at and think about how this facility needs to change to accommodate all those things.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jess. Actually, in this current fiscal year, we have budgeted EV chargers, and we bid them, and they came back fairly high. And then we realized that we were bidding out eight chargers, 8 spots, if you will, and that's probably too much for right now. So we're going back to the drawing board, and because the way we bid it, we have to put it back out to bid. So we're bidding it again. We might not have the expense hit this fiscal year. We're going to start with 4. But have the infrastructure run out, so there's available for 4 or more, because there's discussion in this industry. So these chargers, that technology for these chargers may change too.
Yep.
So investing in 8 may not be prudent right now, you know. So we're doing that. And here's my slight complaint that there's significant incentives for the infrastructure to get power from this facility out to that parking lot for those chargers, but there's none for an organization like ours for chargers themselves. I was hopeful that there would be, but probably not. But we're moving forward with that. So, any other questions on the annual plan?
I see that there's a change for the collection and securing of native seed, and I heard yesterday from our Division of Plants and Forests that they're experiencing seed shortage nationwide. And I was just curious if the commission has started to see that as well.
We haven't. For the species, like one of the species that we collected more than ever is bush clover, so that seems like it's higher. That's basically all I have for. Okay.
Just curious.
Yeah. And they're collecting forest straight over the
State forest,
Sure.
nurseries. Yeah.
Right. Any other questions about the annual plan?
Can we have a motion to approve the annual plan for fiscal year 23-24? I will second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. At any time, you know, you can always reach out to me if you look at this annual plan again. If you have questions about it, reach out. I'll do my best to answer them. If not, find an answer for it. Okay.
Yep, next action item is the operating budget, 5-year Paris budget projection.
Okay, so we have the 1-year budget that we work on this time of year, and then we also, as a public authority, we're required to do a 5-year budget, which is in Paris, Public Authority Reporting Information System. It's a projection. That budget, the annual budget for us for 1 year is tied And we take a look, there's some of the variances here. I'm going to hit some of the highlights, and then I'll ask if there's any questions. Then we'll take a look at that 5-year budget, and then see if there's questions on that. So if you take a look at this current budget here, this fiscal year that we're still in versus this one, income, state, local grants, that 5090, that's based on a $3 million. That's making an assumption that we will get $3 million out of the EPF again this year. And that is also the balance of that 2.090 million is based on a rollover from this contractual line here. So of this number, we're incorporating it here, adding to the 3. Other income, mitigation fees, we're reducing the mitigation fees coming from the landfill to $25,000 per quarter because it continues to decrease as the state or the city decreases the amount of trash coming in, which reduces our tipping fees. And then there's $2,500 in there that comes from a mitigation requirement from the residents in, which is by cross gates, for funding habitat work on that area of the preserve. Lisa mentioned in her report, merchandise revenue is up, so we're budgeting that at 24. And then 2 other lines here. There's lease revenue from the tenants from the 2nd floor. That's making an assumption that the tenants continue to be a tenant. They had to notify us by the end of February because their lease expires at the end of May. And this is the balance here of 80,000 is primarily from some donations, but the major donations to Trustco Bank, the endowment. So that's the income source. The income source is salaries and benefits here. Salaries and benefits across the board are budgeted at a 2% increase, and that's dependent on what the governor's decision is coming out of the division budget. But it's also, there's a decrease in that line to some degree because the benefit rate that we're using, that Lisa calculates on an annual basis, has decreased from 42 in this current fiscal year to 40%. And then the contractual line is a little lower here too, because it does not include this 150,000 top income from the Forest Service wildland risk reduction grant. All the other numbers here are not really significant. Year over year, I do want to point out that Lisa and I have talked about, we're now breaking out this one line where we had the expenses for facility to show you what the utilities look like. So here's utilities budgeted at the upcoming fiscal year, close to 86,000. That's an increase of Lisa 13, almost 14,000 this year, right over. And then finally pointing out 2 other things. There are no capital expenditures here because budgeting this early in the fiscal year is difficult to know what we're going to need going forward. So I'm going to expect the board will see another budget at some point in the fiscal year of 23-24. Take a look at. And part of that also in this 80,000 includes those EV chargers I was talking about, Jeff. So that's not going to happen this year. So you're going to see something here for that. Finally, this OPEB service costs, other post-employment benefits, jobs benefit. We left that blank because the increase in the discount rate, because the increased interest rates, results in us getting a credit. This is not cash, but it results in us getting a credit. We don't know what that credit is. So we leave it blank for now.
I'm sure you leave this topic blank.
So that's kind of the budget overall. And if you have questions, we can talk about that, and then we can look at the 5-year. I'll tell you some of the assumptions that are built into that.
Was the 13% increase on utilities due to cost of supply increases or?
And cost nation, right? Both electricity and natural gas, which actually ties back into natural gas. Right.
Chris, is our tenant Nature Conservancy do you guys, is some of your staff remote? Is everybody back?
No one's back. So this is my 4th time in the building since 2019. Wow. So we rarely are coming in, and we're having statewide discussion about what we're doing with all of our facilities. Have nothing to report or even to assume.
I was wondering, because as I go by and I see the parking
The
lot.
parking lot's up here, yeah.
You can tell when we have gas and it's full, but on a day-to-day basis, I thought that was the case.
Although we have been holding more, team meetings in person, and it's been good. So I think we're evaluating also what we want to mandate as far as when people and how often people have to show up.
Yeah.
They're working hard. They're just not doing it here.
All right. It's just interesting how different organizations have come through this process.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you need them here?
It depends on who they are, right? So some job functions, my team's always running around the Capitol or visiting Tony's colleagues at DC or, Washington. But other folks, like our legal team uses the facility quite a bit, and our files are there.
Yep.
And I know our stewardship team is appreciative of their ability to share equipment and collaborate with the team here at the Pine Bush. So there's lots of factors. Right?
There's a really tight relationship between the stewardship staff and the Nation Conservancy and our stewardship and fire staff here. We help them, they help us.
And you think maybe that's because you had relationships, individual relationships before COVID had us all working remotely, or can new staff establish those kind of relationships remotely?
Like the stewardship one we have now?
But just on an everyday working kind of basis. It seems like those of us who have a lot of folks here at Pine Bush have been here for a long time. And I would think the same thing for your organization, and they had relationships before, so you can have a lot of interplay. But as we get new employees, it seems like it's a more difficult thing to establish on a Zoom call than it is working together and collaborating physically.
Yeah, I definitely think our newer employees and people who've come on since 2019 have had a harder time generally, establishing themselves and building rapport. It's just a very different process to do online.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you go to these in-person meetings and you're, oh, you're so tall.
Yeah.
That's like the number one comment, right? So we're trying to solve for, how can we continue to provide people flexibility and the efficiency that this provides of being able to work in this new way, but also, come together when it's needed and when helpful. And I think that's kind of a universal issue.
Right now, it seems like you can work remotely, but after a little while, we're going to say, it'd be a lot better if we got people together, more personal contact.
I'm sure you can find a consulting firm to create a study that says all of the things.
That's right, wherever you want.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on budget? All right, let's look at this 5-year. Okay, so there's some built-in assumptions into this 5-year budget. These are actual numbers. These are audited financials, 2022. This is where we're estimated for the current fiscal year, where we're going to land. This is the budget that we're considering that we just talked about, and then going forward these other 3 years. Our building assumption into that. I have to look at my notes that Lisa put together, because otherwise I forget. So program revenue, we talked about that. That line is up from 17 to 24,000. That's across the board. You see that here. Next line is lease revenue. We're making an assumption that we will continue lease revenue. Hopefully it's our current tenant, and if not, hopefully we have another tenant that maintains that revenue. The other revenue decreases. You can see this coming down here. This is from we're decreasing the mitigation money that's coming in from the landfill. Moving forward, there's a number here on investment earnings. So here's our investment earnings last year, audited. We have no idea what they are, obviously, and so we put in the number of 50,000 because that's roughly what it costs in expenses on an annual basis. So it's a wash. That's what we do every year. That's budget. So there's 50,000 here, and then here's the financing of the 50,000 there. It goes forward, making the assumption that we will get $3 million every year from the EPF based on the current fiscal year. Again, that's the assumption. Salaries are budgeted across the board at 2%, which is in this current fiscal year. The benefit rate, which I mentioned, dropped from this current fiscal year to what we're looking at for next year from 42 to 40%. That 40% carries across the board. And then because this discount rate, I hate talking about non-cash amounts, because of the increase in the discount rate and the interest rates, we are likely to see a credit again, probably next year for OPEB. So not knowing what that really is going to look like, we're taking that across the board at no expense. But with that said, if you took out the non-cash expenses, it's showing a deficit here at the bottom. If you take out non-cash expenses like OPEB and the other things here, you actually have a slight gain across years. Any questions? We went through this in detail with the audit committee last Friday. And Don had to listen to me ramble the day before because he okay. Questions? If not, motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So continuing to talk about OPEB for Mr. John Ross. I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'm going to turn this over to you as the treasurer.
Do I have a second? Chest, back me up here.
You're in the hot seat, buddy.
So action item C. Let me do this. Sure. Action item C is the annual transfer of funds from the endowment fund into the OPEB account. We do this every year. We consider it every year, either 3%, 4%, 5% based on decisions that we made about 5 years ago. So Lisa takes a look at what is the endowment value over a 3-year period, and then we take that 3-year average balance and then look at what 5%, 4%, or 3% would be. And that was discussed by the audit committee.
Speaking to the audit committee, we were, everyone was comfortable with either 4 or 5. We tried to be conservative and in our approach to this. You were comfortable on each, Don? And of the 2, you preferred? I preferred 5. Okay. And I think the rest of the committee agreed with Don's opinion on it.
Yep. 5%, which is consistent with last year, correct?
That is correct. Exactly.
Okay. Questions? Or motion?
They blamed it on me, so I'll make the motion.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Second.
Nancy. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And we have, just like every other, it seems like every meeting that we have multi-year vendor contracts, which is fine. There's 2 multi-year vendor contracts. The first one is for facility management services. This is for First Columbia to take over facility management services. That contract would begin February 1st. It's a 3-year contract, and it goes through January 31st of 26. That was based on a request for proposals, interviews. They were chosen as the vendor of the highest value. And then, if you remember at the September meeting, we had folks from the Natural Heritage Program present to us for the satellite imagery, the remote sensing imagery that they have worked with our science staff to interpret. So this is a new contract to work with them to basically look at remote sensing imagery over time and say, are we getting to where we want to get to? Are we transitioning habitat from low quality, like invasive species with black locust, to quality pine barrens? And we used to do that just on the ground by doing vegetation surveys and photos on the ground. This is actually a more accurate evaluation because you're looking at the entire landscape, and you're also doing ground truthing surveys. And eventually, this project will result in a heritage program, which works under SUNY Albany. They're a joint project between DEC and SUNY, the Research Foundation, to publish something in a peer-reviewed journal with our staff about it. And it's because it's going over 2 fiscal years, that's why it's multi-year contract. And the 2 contracts follow. So for first Columbia, the price for the management fee is $28,000 the first year, 30, then 32,000. Pretty reasonable increases over an annual period. And SUNY Foundation, I believe, is 24. I'm just going to say 26. Thank you, Tony. 24,874. And the Heritage Program has a relationship directly with DEC and State Parks too, as a preferred vendor.
That's 24,800 for all 3 years, and not each year of the 3.
That is correct. So this probably won't be a 3-year. It's going to go over. It's going to go from next fiscal year into it's going to straddle 2 fiscal years.
Okay. January of 2023 to November of 2023.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions on the contract?
We have a motion to approve. I'll make that motion.
Tony?
Second.
Harvey?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we are right on time. Amazing. Okay. Yes.
Yep, Steve, with your presentation on the Carter Blue.
Oh, is it gonna go on its own?
Okay. Everybody can see me?
Yes.
All right. Thanks. Before I get started, I just wanted to say that the work I'm presenting is very much a collaborative effort. I wanted to especially acknowledge Dylan and Neil for their contributions, as well as our science technicians who collected the data, and then the stewardship and fire staff who do much of the habitat management that you're going to see. And I wanted to start with just a few quick reminders for you about Carter Blue ecology that will be relevant for the rest of the presentation. First, this is a species that occurs in oak savannas and pine barrens ecosystems. So they like vegetation conditions that are relatively open, very few trees in the canopy, and a mix of shrubs and grasses and other herbaceous species in the understory. The second thing to remember is that the larvae only feed on lupin. So lupin is a critical component of the species habitat. So without lupin, there are not going to be any Carter blues. And then the third thing to remember is that the Carter blues have 2 generations or 2 broods of butterflies per year. So they overwinter in the egg stage. Those eggs then give rise to the first generation of adults. Those adults then lay eggs that give rise to the second generation or second brood of adults. And then that second generation of adults lay eggs that overwinter. And then those eggs become the first generation for the following year. The Carter blue is an endangered species at both the state and the federal levels. And the threats to the Carter blue are really the same that affect most endangered species. Much of its habitat has been destroyed and replaced with human development. Here are just a couple of local examples that you probably recognize. Habitat fragmentation usually accompanies habitat loss. So habitat fragmentation makes it difficult for individual butterflies to move among habitat patches. So for Carter blues, even things like roads or forest strips can act as fragmented features on the landscape. Habitat degradation is also a problem. Decades of fire suppression in the pine bush has degraded habitat. Without fire to periodically burn these areas had become overgrown with shrubs or trees, leading to conditions which are not suitable for the Karner blue. And then invasive species, especially invasive plants, also degrade habitat for the Karner blue. They can shade out lupin and other plants needed by the Karners in the understory, as can be seen here by Asiatic bittersweet taking over the understory. Or you can have plants like black locust come in and completely alter the vegetation structure and composition into something like a forest that's completely unsuitable for the Karners. And then over the long term, we expect climate change to pose a threat to the species here in New York and across its range. So what are we doing to address these threats? Well, we're dealing with the threats due to habitat loss and fragmentation by protecting lands. As Chris was just talking about, we have ongoing efforts to acquire land as it becomes available. And adding land increases the size of the preserve, which is important because it then more land means that we can support larger populations of Karners, and those larger populations are less likely to go extinct. Adding land also increases the connectivity of the preserve, which reduces fragmentation and makes it easier for Karners to move among different parts of the preserve. We're dealing with habitat degradation through habitat management. So this is our sort of our recipe for making barrens. We take communities that have been degraded by fire suppression or invasive species, and then we use a combination of mechanical, chemical, and fire management to get to communities that will support Karner blue butterflies, such as successional northern sampling grasslands and pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And then once we get these sites restored to these conditions, we also use those same means, mechanical, chemical, and fire to sort of maintain them in that condition. So this slide is clearly an oversimplification, but it's meant to summarize, not downplay the amount of work that's involved. Joel, Jessley, and Tyler and their staff do a lot of important work to get us from over here to over here and then to keep us here. Now, when we restore these areas, we need to make sure that there's abundant lupin populations. So we seed lupin into these restored areas, as well as other native nectar and species and grasses. So this just shows you how much we have planted. So before we started managing, there was only 4 hectares of lupin remaining on the landscape. So there's these pink purplish areas that are, they're almost difficult to see, and that's because the patches were so small and so few and far between. However, since we started managing, we've planted over 320 hectares of lupin, native nectar species and grasses into these areas. So we've greatly expanded the distribution and abundance of lupin and other nectar species considerably. Now, once we restore these patches, the butterflies don't show up to them, or at least not right away, especially if those patches are isolated. So we help the Karner populations by accelerating the colonization of these restored patches, and we do that through captive rearing and release. And with captive rearing and release, we gather up gravid females. We transport those gravid females to a rearing facility run by New Hampshire Department of Fish and Game. They rear the eggs and larvae, and then they give us back pupae. We keep those pupae until they're ready to eclose, and then we put them in these butterfly tents with a nectar source, and then when the butterflies emerge from the chrysalis or when they eclose, usually on the same day, we take them and release them into those restored sites. So this map here just shows you where we've done the releases. So we've released over 8,000 butterflies in 28 different patches, starting in 2008. And most recently, you may remember from last year in the upper left-hand corner here, last year we released some butterflies at a site known as Zebra. Was sort of our most recent release. All right, so that was just sort of a really quick, brief overview of our recovery efforts for these butterflies. To determine the effectiveness of these efforts, we need to know how our recovery efforts are affecting population size. And in particular, we want to know how is the population size doing relative to recovery criteria. And for the state and federal recovery criteria, we're looking for greater than 3,000 first or second brood adults in 4 to 5 consecutive years. And we also want to know how our population is spatially distributed, because one of the other recovery criteria is that the population is distributed in greater than 5 subpopulations. So to answer this question, we've been monitoring Karner blues in the preserve since 2007 using a method known as distance sampling. And this slide just shows you where the areas where we've been monitoring the butterflies this past year. So these blue areas represent our survey sites, which is just a subsite of all the restored areas that are likely to contain butterflies. Each of these sites is covered with a series of transects that our field techs walk along to count butterflies. And a single survey is our field techs walk all of these transects at all of these sites within a single day is just one survey. And then our field techs do 20 to 30 surveys over the course of the spring and the summer. But the idea there is we're trying to get as many surveys as possible that span both the first and the second brood. So I'll skip over the analysis and just get right to the results. So let's start by looking at the brood sizes for all the survey sites combined. So the first thing I want you to notice here is that the amount of area that we surveyed over time, here represented by the bars, has increased. So that really represents our restoration efforts. So as we restore these areas and then release butterflies into those areas, we've been incorporating those areas into our survey efforts. Next, I want to point out the points and the lines here. This is our brood size estimates. And so you can see that since we started counting, the number of butterflies has increased from a few hundred individuals here back in 2007 to now we regularly have a second brood that fluctuates somewhere between 10 and 20,000 individuals in most years. And remember the state and federal recovery threshold here is this dashed horizontal line here, that's 3,000. That's the state and federal recovery threshold. And starting in 2013, our second brood has exceeded that threshold for the first time, and then both broods have been over that threshold since then. So looking at this population trend, overall, it looks like our recovery efforts appear to be working. Also keep in mind that these abundance estimates are based just on our survey sites, which are pictured here in blue. There are butterflies at nearly all of the sites where there is lupin, which is pictured in this pale green. We can't possibly survey all those areas. So the estimates I showed you are actually very conservative. There are many more butterflies out there than the estimates that are just based just on our survey sites. And the population estimates are high, mostly because we've increased the quantity of habitat. However, I also think we've increased the quality of the habitat, as you can see here if you look at the densities of the butterflies. So these are the same estimates you saw in the previous graph, but now they've been adjusted by the amount of area that we surveyed in each year. And the populations here went a little crazy in 2020, so it compacts the trends here in other years. But you can still see the densities increased here starting in 2013. On average, the densities are higher here in recent years than they were here early on when we first started counting. So I would argue that if by having higher densities of butterflies, that's probably a very good indication that we're also maintaining higher habitat quality in addition to the increases in habitat quantity. And the butterflies are not equally distributed across the preserve. Just to give you some idea of the contributions of the different areas, we grouped restored areas into subpopulations. And the groupings are based primarily on how close the restored areas are to each other. If they're within 200 meters of each other, they're considered to be within the same subpopulation unless there's geographic barriers such as roads that are dividing those subpopulations. So here are the relative contributions of the different subpopulations. And this is just for the second brood. And so this is the contributions in each of the years that we've been surveying. So the takeaway of this slide is that we've increased our spatial distribution of the population from a few subpopulations early on here in 2007 to 2008 to now we have measurable populations in 7 of the 8 subpopulations. So I would say based on the increases in population size, the increases in densities, and the successful establishment of multiple subpopulations, we know what we're doing is working. Determining why it is working is a bit more complicated. I think we know we're putting a lot of the pieces in place in terms of vegetation structure, lupin, nectar species, and disturbance. But I would say we're still figuring out sort of the right amounts and the timing of it all. And then on top of all that, we have the influence of weather on populations, and we're still trying to understand that as well. So our challenge moving forward is to try to make sense of some of those factors. And so to this end, we've been monitoring habitat annually at 7 sites since 2017. Here's a map of those. Here's a map showing those sites. And here's a list of some of the habitat features we're measuring at those sites. So things like lupin density, spring and summer nectar species richness, nectar species evenness, nectar mean frequency, percent grass cover, overstory cover, shade heterogeneity. Those are just some examples of the habitat features that we're monitoring at those sites. And here are just some examples of what those data look like for just a single site. So now that we're starting to get a time series of habitat measurements at some of these sites, we can start to relate the habitat conditions at these sites to the Carner densities at these sites. And then by exploring these relationships, we can hopefully better understand the mechanisms that are driving the population dynamics, and then use that understanding to better manage our populations. And so environmental variables, as I mentioned, are also likely to be important. They're going to likely to play a role in population dynamics. So we'll need to consider things like temperature and rainfall. We can get that information from our weather station. Snowpack in the winter is also something that's likely to be important, especially for protecting overwintering eggs. So we can hopefully extract those data from our community science snowpack monitoring program. And so this is sort of, I think, the next step here is where we're going to be taking the densities and relating it to these habitat and environmental variables. So hopefully in the next few years, you'll be hearing more about that work. So just to wrap this up, I just wanted to remind you that on the whole, our management appears to be working for the Carner Blue. We see that in the increase of the population size from 2007 to where we are now. We successfully established multiple subpopulations throughout the preserve, and we've been over this recovery threshold, the state and federal recovery thresholds, which is at 3,000. We've been over that threshold for the last 10 years. So as I just mentioned, we still have a lot of work to understand the mechanistic relationships between management and population response of the Carners. However, I'd like to think that we've bought ourselves a little bit of time here, because I think that the prospect of losing the population here at the Albany Pine Bush, I think, is considerably less dire now than it was even just 10 years ago. And that's all I wanted to share. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Questions for Steve?
No question, it just seems like a good success story.
I didn't hear that. Was that a question or a comment?
I said, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it looks like our work is paying off, which isn't necessarily the same. It's not playing out necessarily that way across the entire range. Our population seems to be doing better as of recently than some of the other populations out west. We're still trying to figure out exactly why that is, other than, you know, we're awesome.
Exactly.
Great.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. Turning it back to Neil.
All right, good morning again. I don't know if I'm not even going to try and top that. Steve did a great job of that presentation. Thanks, Steve. Nice to see everyone again. So I am going to talk to you. The agenda says trailhead counters. We know that we have 12 trailheads, and I know that because that was one of the quiz questions at the holiday party. There are 12. But I'm going to talk to you about this little device, so you guys can see that with my weird background. So we have, you know, for a long time, we've had a pretty simple question. Like most of our science work, it starts with a really simple question, and then you find out, well, getting the answer is pretty complicated. Thank goodness from Steve's previous presentation, Jess, that's all out of TNC's conservation by design strategy as well. What led to all that research. So in this case, though, the simple question is, how many people visit the preserve? So it's pretty much more straightforward, right? To count how many people come in the door for the Discovery Center and keep track of that. But for a long time, we've wondered, how many people visit the trails? What is the level of human use on the trails? And we've loosely had some general indications, but I wanted to take a few minutes now and just show you. I'm gonna have to share my screen, but I'm gonna show you the new system that we've just installed. A combined effort of stewardship, the fire staff helped, and of course the science staff. So let's see if, and I'm going to be showing you all of this system is all online. So I'm going to just share my screen hopefully and share this website with you all. Chris, I can't see you anymore, but if you could let me know if you're seeing the website and the map with all the trailheads.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right. Can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So first I wanted to start out the trail counters, these simple little devices. We've installed not only at all of the trailheads, but also in Carner Barrens East, because we have multiple trails and it's a high use area. We wanted to try and look at trail usage within the Discovery Loop, as well as individually the Blue Loop and the Yellow Trail, and get a sense of how many people that come to the center visit each of those individual trails. This whole system, as you can see, is managed on a website. And the website and the map is all interactive. Myself and Dylan are the administrators, and education and stewardship staff have access to all this data. And within each trailhead, so we can look, I'm going to read my notes here. The kind of data that we're able to collect is, let's pick a couple of sites here. So if we go to, well, first I want to show you, so each trailhead. Uh-oh. Hold on, bear with me. Sorry, I guess I was in here too long.
Technology is great.
Boom. All right. Don't need that. Very much. All right. So any one of these trailheads, we'll just pick one. Where are we here? Here's the Great Dune. So you can see here's the trailhead, and the trail counter is actually down here along the trail. There it is. So if you visited the preserve recently in the past couple of months, you may have noticed some new nice pressure treated trail posts, trail markers. And within this post, that device is hidden, and it looks like a simple little knot hole. And within that knot hole, the untrained eye is the sensor, and it's picking up the heat signature that people produce when they walk by. So no longer do we need a reflector or something on each side of the trail. Simply people walking by, they get detected as they walk by. And I wanted to show you a little bit of the data that we're able to collect. So good, we've got those three. We got Madison Avenue, Carner Barrens Blue Loop, and Carner Barrens Yellow. And now if we look, we can do a number of really cool things. We can set the date. These have only been out for a couple of months. So we can look at daily totals. You can look at each day. Weekly. We got weekly trail use. Yeah, monthly, of course. Look at what's going on overall over months. And lastly, we can compare all. So there's a couple of things I wanted to show you here. So overall, we can look at usage between trailheads over the course of time. So look at the bottom of this graphic, for example. It's showing us the daily average for these three sites. So we're looking at Carner Barrens Blue Loop and Yellow Loop, which typically most people don't walk both of those. The usage is pretty high. In the case of Madison Avenue, I want to point out that we have to divide that by 2. So the daily average use in Mad Ave at the trailhead, because people are going in and out at the same point, they're actually getting counted twice. So in that case, the daily average people passing the counter is only 53 relative to the 73 and 66 from the Yellow and Blue Loops in Carner Barrens East. And we can look at these overall trends. And the last thing I wanted to show you here is that we can look at usage overall, and we can download all of this data. So the system doesn't cut those counts in half where they need to be counted in half, but we can download that as an Excel spreadsheet and do that ourselves. We go all, for example, and then look at the master summary. The number varies pretty heavily. Go back, bear with me here 1 second. The pie chart may do this better. Yeah, so you can see here some trailheads, like there's one down at the 6 Mile Waterworks at the park. Then you've got the DC Loop, Madison Avenue, the Great Dune. almost all of these, except for the DC Loop, the yellow and blue trail, need to be cut in half. So we can download that data and look at that. And why do we want to do this? Why is this data useful? So we can do a number of things. The applications for this data we're only beginning to explore. One, of course, is what we're looking at is trail usage, not necessarily number of people. So it's all relative because, like I said, in many cases, right, almost all of these trailheads are single points of entry and exit. Of course, though, we're also missing a lot of the backyard and tangential entrances and exits to the preserve. But overall, it's going to give us some really tight quantitative data to be able to look at trail usage over time. And I should point out, this is the system that the Nature Conservancy is using locally in New York State. It's also the system that parks in New York State and the National Park Service are using. By being able to look at where people go when, it'll allow us to start thinking about targeting maintenance of trails that get excessively used. We can start targeting, if we want volunteer naturalists, for example, to be out talking to people. Well, if you look at the time of day, look at the time of day data for any given site, we'll just say DC Loop. Then if you look at the hour, 24 hours. So if you look at the hourly data, you can see that in the case of the Blue Loop at the Discovery Center, well, the peak usage is actually in the middle of the day. So if you want to do targeted surveys of trail users, if you want volunteer naturalists or forest rangers to be out greeting people on the trail, you can look at hours of day, days of the week, particular times of the month, where you might be more likely to interact with more people than others. So it allows us for the first time to be able to have quantitative data to be able to target additional commission and DEC resources to try and interact with people. We can also start looking at things like trail usage and erosion and wildlife conservation goals. And lastly, of course, and certainly not least, you would be surprised how many grants that we apply for actually ask about usage of the preserve. So now we'll be able to actually generate data that we can look at and utilize in grant applications for all kinds of things. And the biggest takeaway for me, and I'm not going to bore you trying to watch me navigate all the data, but the usage of our trails is significantly higher, in the tens of thousands, higher than what I or any of the staff had anticipated it being. So all we know, for example, right? I mean, Chris can look out his window, for example, and know that we saw a lot more people utilizing the preserve during the pandemic, when it was a phenomenal local resource to just let people get out of their houses and go for a hike, a snowshoe, a walk, or ride your bike. But now we're really going to be able to have the data. Again, while it's not necessarily an absolute count of the number of people that visit the preserve over time, it's giving us a phenomenal, it'll give us phenomenal data about trail usage and whether, and those trends, right? Trail usage up, down, is it flat, what time, and then being able to drill down and look at time of year, months, weeks, etc., is just a great resource. So these have been out for about 2.5 months now. And I hope that we'll be able to provide you with an annual summary of what these counters are telling us about usage of the preserve, not just in any one place, but across all of the trails. I will leave it there, Chris. If folks have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Great, thanks, Neil.
For the longer loops, do you have data for how many people go in for a short period and come out the original one, and how many people actually do the entire loop? I'm thinking especially your longer loops.
Yeah, that's a great question, Harvey. I wish. So we had a long discussions about where and how to deploy these. And since we've designed trail usage to be accessed from the trailheads, that was the metric that we landed on and the places that we put these. But there's all kinds of great questions that we could ask if we had funding for additional counters. In particular, questions like you asked, where are they going, and how many people enter a trail versus do the whole loop. But secondly, there are a number of legitimate tangential trail entrances that we've provided to neighborhoods to get into and out of the preserve, right? What used to be across each municipality, there were some bootleg trails effectively. We've legitimized some of those trails as we being Joel and Jesse have authorized and marked those little entrances, but we're not counting all those neighborhood folks that are coming and going. It's also trying to keep the project manageable. As it is to visit all 13 of these counters takes a good 4 hours to go, and you've got a little docking station, a little shuttle, but you have to travel to all the trailheads, download the data, come back to the preserve, and then upload it to the website. So it's a matter of resources and human use. But those are great questions. And if any of our academic partners have students that want to try and drill into some of this data, it may be an opportunity to get some grants and some bodies to be able to do more. But this is a huge step forward in our ability to be able to look at what's going on the trail and how that trail usage is impacting both trail condition and the wildlife and the ecosystem that we're working to conserve.
Any questions for Neil? Okay,
Thank you much. Happy holidays, everyone.
thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Back to Erin.
All right, thank you. So during this brief presentation, I'll be referring to the org chart that you received in your board packet. And thank you, Chris, for the introduction to the staffing changes in the education department that Chris mentioned at the start of the meeting today. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on how we came to these decisions and these new positions. So as you remember, over the summer, we had 2 education staff leave for new opportunities. And that gave us a chance to really take a look at how we were allocating resources within the education department and were those resources meeting the needs that we have in terms of staffing. And a couple of things that we took a close look at were projects that are coming soon, especially looking at the Discovery Center. The Discovery Center, hard to believe, we've now been open just over 15 years. And our exhibits are starting to become in need of renewal and in some cases replacement, really taking a holistic view at our exhibits in the Discovery Center. And also considering that staff are managing a lot more contracts than we used to be. So we have multiple building facility contracts that our Discovery Center manager, Blake, is managing. So that's another factor to consider. Also considering we are a 7-day-a-week operation and staying open, especially within the time period that we're in, and that may be needing to be out for extended periods of time. So all these things we're thinking about, and so we made a decision to shift staff resources more towards the Discovery Center, and that's where our Discovery Center Operations Coordinator position started. The idea for that began to really try to shift more resources towards the Discovery Center, enabling us to better manage all those contracts, start thinking about exhibit replacement or renewal, and keeping the doors open 7 days a week throughout the year. So Chris Benton Lowe's is in that position right now. He just started this fall. And then going back to the programs, part of our department. So Tammy is our preserve naturalist and educator. And that position is just a minor adjustment. We had a science education specialist position. And we took a close look at that too, and thought a lot about, was the person in that role really, what really were they doing in that role, and how do we better represent the needs of that part of the department. And so we made some adjustments and created the preserve naturalist educator position. With these adjustments, we actually didn't increase spending by really very much. And so we actually had additional resources left that we were able to create a part-time environmental educator position, which we just filled. Actually, the person has not started yet, but we'll be starting on Monday. And that's a part-time position that will be helping to fulfill the program needs that remain as well.
I don't think you all get a chance to see the org chart very often.
Yeah, so in the fine print up here, so this is our education department here. So Pammy and Jackie and Blake, and our part-time environmental educator report to me, and then that shows further down who's reporting to Blake and to Jackie. And right now we have a seasonal educator position open that we'll be filling soon, and our intern. So that was
Any questions for Aaron?
Great.
My battery's down.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next on our agenda is for a few minutes early, but that's fine. We do have an agenda item for executive session.
We do. So Wendy, for those of you on Zoom, she sent a message. So anybody who is not a board member or a representative, you're going to be logged out for executive session, and then you can come back in 15 or 20 minutes. But the only thing we're going to do is we're going to come back in to close the meeting. So before we go into executive session, maybe other business?
Yeah, does anyone have any other or new business that they'd like to raise?
Okay.
Nothing in the chat. See,
Nope. Okay. So Wendy, you can log folks out.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So I have moved to leave executive session. Yeah.
We all voted.
And I think
Yep.
Jessica seconded it,
Yeah.
and we're all in favor.
All right. Now we have to adjourn regular session.
Correct.
All right.
I'll make that motion.
John,
Second.
Harvey.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see everyone.
You too.
Have a good Christmas. See you guys. See you, Mark.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.